Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, oh, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see.
Was grace that taught my heart to fear,
my heart to feel,
and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, in the hour I first believed.
And toils and snares that I have already come. It was grace
has
brought me safe this far. Grace will lead me home.
When we have been there, 10,000 years,
10,000 years,
bright shining as the sun. We have no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
Greetings and welcome to the March on Washington Film Festival. I'm Isisara Bey, Artistic Director. As always, we begin by acknowledging the source of all life and the seven directions, north, south, east, west, above, below, and within, and to the cycle of life of African ancestored people, those who have gone on before, those living, and those yet to be born. Because they were, we are. Because we are, they will be. Our theme, Who Tells the Story, is inspired by the African proverb, until the lion learns to write, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. We are lifting up the authentic and denied voices of history, unpacking the distortions that have been told, and opening space for each of us to be self-determined in telling our own story. In terms of spreading the news, it started with the drum and the griot. African people have communicated in Medu Neter on the walls of temples and pyramids in the Nile Valley, and tomes in the libraries of Timbuktu and Alexandria. On these shores, African Americans knew well the value of words, reading, and freedom of expression to lifting up the race from the after effects of bondage. From 1827, when John Russwurm and Samuel Cornish published the first newspaper owned and operated by African Americans, to now, in the age of digital, the need for independent news sources is critical, as much as any time in our history. To lead our discussion on the history of the African American press from 1827 to now is Frederick Joseph. Frederick is an award-winning marketing professional, activist, philanthropist, and author of the upcoming highly anticipated book, The Black Friend, in December of this year. He's got over a decade of marketing experience and is a Forbes Under 30 list maker for marketing and advertising. He is the sole creator of the largest GoFundMe campaign in history, the Black Panther Challenge, which ultimately generated over $43 million in earned advertising and media for Disney and raised $950,000, allowing more than 75,000 children worldwide to see Black Panther for free. He is also the creator of the largest individual COVID-19 support effort, the Rent Relief Campaign, which has raised over $1 million. Frederick has been honored as the 2018 Comic-Con Humanitarian of the Year Award and a member of the 2018 Route 100 list of most influential African Americans. We look to Fred to introduce the panelists, and now welcome Fred.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is an absolute honor, and
thank you for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before I get started, the first thing I want to do is take a moment, as we're all here right now celebrating Blackness, and just say rest in peace to our sister, Breonna Taylor. And in that, I'm going to start off by introducing Frances Tony Draper. Dr. Frances Murphy Draper has been an influential community leader in her native Baltimore for decades. With leadership positions in journalism, church she founded, and education, in February 2018, Dr. Draper was named chairman of the board and publisher of the Afro-American newspapers, which was founded in 1892 by her great-grandfather. She was president of the company from 1987 to 1999. The Afro has been at the forefront of ever-changing media landscape for 126 years, she said last year. Today, we offer a wide variety of platforms to get the word out, including a robust array of social media products. However, our basic mission of championing our people, our causes, our hopes, dreams, and aspirations are likely stronger than ever. Black lives have always mattered and continue to matter to us. In 2002, Dr. Draper became the founding pastor of the Freedom Temple African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in South Baltimore. She received a Doctor of Ministry degree in preaching and leadership from the United Theological Seminary in Ohio in 2006. Dr. Draper received a bachelor's degree in Spanish language English from Morgan State University, as one of the university's Board of Regents for 24 years, actually, before stepping down in June. Dr. Draper also has a master's in education, business administration, and pastoral counseling. Dr. Draper said her mother, Frances L. Murphy II, helped inspire her to be a community leader. She encouraged me to honor God, treat people the way you want to be treated, and surround yourself with younger people who keep you up to date on the latest trends and technologies. It's now Dr. Draper's turn to inspire the younger generations. I tell them it's important to give back to your community because many people need a genuine hand up in order to survive and thrive, she said. When people are healthy economically, socially, and spiritually, communities are healthy. Dr. Draper is the author of No Ordinary Hookup, a book containing the love letters of her grandparents, Carl J. Murphy, and Delta Sigma Theta co-founder, Vashti Turley Murphy. She and her husband, Andre, have been married for more than 40 years and have 4 adult children and 12 great-grandchildren. Wow.
Ooh, if I'd known you were going to read all that, Fred.
Well, I just want to say you have to give credit where credit's due. That's an amazing bio. You've accomplished so much, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So,
Thank you.
Absolutely. So next, I'm going to introduce Danielle Belton. Danielle C. Belton is the editor-in-chief of The Root, the leading African-American news and opinion site. She was the youngest person ever appointed to lead the news organization in 2016. Previously, she was one of the first Black women to lead a writers' room in late television in 2012 for BT's offering Don't Sleep, hosted by TJ Holmes. A St. Louis native, Belton is also a mental health advocate and currently resides in New York City.
Hey, Fred.
Hey, Danielle, what's going on?
Oh, it's all good. Everything's going on all the time.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So let me introduce Mr. Muhammad so we can get started.
Awesome.
All right, great. So what I'm going to do is actually introduce Mr. Muhammad, and then we're going to give him a second to come back. So Ozier Muhammad is an American photojournalist who has been on the staff of the New York Times since 1992. He has also worked for Ebony Magazine, the Charlotte Observer, and Newsday. He earned a BA in 1972 in photography from Columbia College in Chicago. In 1984, Mr. Muhammad won the George Polk Award for news photography. Wow.
Good evening.
Good evening. So again, I'm excited to be here with the three of you. It's going to be a phenomenal conversation, and I just want to jump right in if that's okay with everyone.
Sure.
So the first question is actually going to be for Mrs. Draper. So Mrs. Draper, so you have more understanding than most have in terms of heritage and legacy. Your great-grandfather founded the Afro, in 1992. You have grandparents who are a part of this amazing book of yours, and your grandmother was one of the founders of Delta Sigma Theta. So with that being said, can you tell us a little bit about what legacy means to you?
So thank you, Fred. And please call me Tony. I'm just much more comfortable than Mrs. Draper. So legacy is both something that we honor and cherish, but it is a tremendous responsibility. You say to yourself, in our family, especially, you look back at the other generations and all that they've gone through, and then it becomes your turn and you want to leave legacy to the next generation. And so it's just an awful responsibility. And of course, I didn't know my great-grandfather, but my grandfather, Carl Murphy, used to say to us, and he wrote to my mother a letter like this as well. You got to remember that you have a family name to uphold. He'd also tell us if you can walk, you can write. And so all of us had to write from a very, very young age. Unpaid work, right? It wasn't a always work that we got paid for. But, so legacy is really, really important. And I say to people all the time that we were blessed and fortunate to have a family of writers, and we had a newspaper to put stories in. But every family has a story. Every single family has a story. And so I always encourage people, write down your stories. Every family has a legacy, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're no different. And so it is very important.
So that being said, every family does have a legacy. We're not gonna, hold back the fact that your legacy is just a little bit different, especially from families like mine. So, can you give us a little bit of what's behind the veil? Like, are there lessons that you've specifically learned from being a part of your family that you might be able to share with us?
Well, so one lesson that I learned, and I don't know that this is so unique to our family, but that you're ever learning and you never know all that you know. You don't even know what you don't know. So that you're always learning. Another thing that we learned as really very, very young children. So my grandfather had a lot of people that he interacted with. And when they would come to the house, and by the way, my husband and I live in the house that he and my grandmother built back in 1929. We were taught we could listen, but we could not contribute to the conversation. And if it was a conversation that was fairly confidential, we couldn't even listen. And so when you go behind the veil, so to speak, I think you'll find a pretty average family in terms of the things that we did together. We ate together, we celebrated holidays together. But maybe a little different, but I don't know, because I only have my own family to compare it to. It's the amount of reading we were required to do, the things that my grandfather expected us to know and comment on in terms of the news of the day, especially the news that impacted our community. And you could not sit at that table and not have read the Afro from cover to cover and not be prepared to engage in a conversation with him. The entire generation, my mom's generation, every single one of them worked at the paper except for one of Carl Murphy's daughters. And so that was really how we grew up. And then when we got to my generation, fourth generation, we looked at each other around the dinner table and said, we're not going to do this, but never.
Okay, so my last question of the first questions we're going to discuss. So what about some obstacles? What obstacles did your family or you specifically face with having this legacy?
Well, you face the challenges of any small business. And so we didn't hear a lot about that, but we did hear some of that about that. So that's a challenge. You face the let me say it this way, when Maryland, as you know, is a segregated state. And so we faced being the test cases in the NAACP's efforts to integrate certain places. I remember having rocks thrown at me and names called as we were trying to, integrate one of the beaches here. And so you face that, so you have, you're expected. I mean, we were expected to be the test case, the children in those cases and that type of thing. And I think we also face the responsibility, as I said earlier, of just being in the family business. I mean, it was a business. And so while it may look glamorous to some on the outside, it was hard work, a lot of work. And so we owned our own presses, you wrote, you edited. I never had to lay any type, but I saw people do that. I had to read it, run your fingers across it and read it backwards for errors and things like that. And so it was just a lot of work. That's just what we did.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of work is an understatement. I think you had me at work when everybody in your family had to read the Afro from one end to the other. I barely asked people to read, my articles from one end to the other. So, but with that being said, I'm going to actually move on to a question with Mr. Muhammad now, and we'll get back to you in a second, Tony. Mr. Muhammad, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good, good, good. So
Yeah.
my first question for you. So I'm a firm believer in the importance of storytelling, especially in how it impacts Black people and Black liberation.
Yes.
So for me, I'm excited to hear from you because you've been at the epicenter of so many of these things with your visual storytelling, right? From civil rights to the current movement that we're in right now. So my first question is, can you give us some of your thoughts on how Black journalism has or hasn't changed in relation to, the impact of the historic movements and the movements now?
Well, Black journalism, like the so-called mainstream journals, have taken a hit because of the internet, the age of the internet. So the Black journalism, I think it's mostly melded into mainstream. There are still some, for instance, the Chicago Defender isn't around anymore. It was a great newspaper. The Pittsburgh Courier has been long gone. And we still have one newspaper here in New York City that's holding on, and that's the Amsterdam News. But for the most part, the newspapers that I grew up reading are no more.
Gotcha. And with that being said, so you're saying that a lot of the newspapers that you grew up reading aren't around. So I see that change, but are there other changes, especially like in the advent of certain tools right now, for example?
Yeah, there are. There's a lot more on social media platforms. So everything shifted, and many of the publications, for instance, I worked for Johnson Publications on staff. I worked for Jet and Ebony magazine, and we know what happened to them. They don't even have a presence online anymore. And the other enterprises that were Black-owned that I worked for was the Chicago Defender as a freelancer, and also Muhammad Speaks. Little nepotism was at play there, but at any rate, I did some freelancing for them, and the Muhammad Speaks has evolved into the Final Call, so it's still around. It's a little bit different than it was before. It covered a lot more in the way of liberation movements domestically and internationally. Like the liberation movements in Africa that brought forth the independence of Ghana, then later on Nigeria, and the rest evolved. So, but it had the Muhammad Speaks really had a great great coverage because of the expansive community in of itself. From coast to coast, there were African Americans who had embraced the Nation of Islam and became members of the community. So there were correspondents from coast to coast and north and south, and also in the Arab world, correspondents writing about the never-ending Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Even some writing from West and East Africa, and also the southern region of Africa. So the footprint of Muhammad Speaks was really large. It was huge, more so than one could argue than the Pittsburgh Courier or the Chicago Defender.
And like Tony, you have this amazing family legacy, right, in the Black media with Muhammad Speaks evolving into the Final Call. So can you speak to the lasting impact of that in your family? Like, how has that impacted not just your family, but also you as a journalist?
Well, I think the legacy that one would see in today's Black press is very, very small because of how the Black press has diminished so much and not through any fault of their own, but because of obvious reasons with social media. But you have publications like The Root, and which is a very vigorous voice, robust voice that doesn't take tea for the fever when it's dealing with issues of race. So it's very admirable, and it sort of reminds me of the kind of reading or the kind of journalism that I'm familiar with growing up in Chicago, with Black-owned radio in Chicago, and with the presence of so many different streams of Black liberation organizations like Jesse Jackson, his presence in Chicago right after the assassination of Dr. King, Muhammad Speaks, Johnson Publications, etc. I think you see the legacy also in Black columnists. There's some great voices. There's Jamel Bowie. I think in my opinion, I think there's a connection, perhaps not necessarily straight to the Nation of Islam, but definitely to sort maybe Black nationalism. Maybe Bowie wouldn't want to be described as being in that realm, and maybe he's not. But it's a much more robust journalism, and again, another no holds bar, no dilly-dallying around issues that are perhaps were taboo in the past, but going straight at the issues and deconstructing them. And also, there are still some independent voices that are not associated with social media platforms that are out there too. So I think that it's larger, but it's more diffuse than it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Understood. And I appreciate like your perspective and especially Tony, because I think that the two of you offer this historic perspective, which is something that we see also in the film that we're speaking for the Black press, Soldiers Without Swords. And I think that everyone needs to watch that because there's such a history of Black journalism and Black newspapers, like I said earlier, being at the actual epicenter of all of our liberation fronts, like from civil rights to the current movement to long before that. So, I'm looking forward to us continuing the conversation, going forward this evening about that. And so now, speaking of more recent, journalism, you mentioned The Root. So I'm going to have a question for our editor-in-chief there, Danielle.
Hello.
Hey, Danielle.
Hey.
Okay. So my question for you. So you're the youngest editor-in-chief in the history of The Root. That's amazing. And it's obviously one of the world's most prominent Black news outlets. Can you tell us how The Root specifically and Black media at large actually have evolved in the digital era?
Oh, definitely. So, I came out of newspapers. I started out as a local newspaper reporter in Midland, Texas, and Bakersfield, California. And around 2004, blogging really started to become popular online. I even started a blog for the Bakersfield Californian at the time. And around 2007, there was just 2007, 2008, there was this big boom of African Americans starting their own blogs, their own websites, their own news organizations online due to the democratization of the media that kind of happened under social media, under the advent of the internet. So it's while newspapers are really struggling with the heavy cost of printing and the fact that Craigslist had destroyed their classifieds business, if you were starting a digital site, all you really needed was an opinion, a really good opinion, and some basic understanding of HTML. And so I started my own blog, The Black Snob. Damon Young and Panama Jackson started Very Smart Brothers. Baratunde Thurston and Cheryl Conti had Jack and Jill Politics. You had all these different blogs. You had Post Bourgie. You had all these blogs that were written from an African-American perspective. At the same time, you had news organizations launching, like The Root, which launched in 2008, as well as The Griot, and a myriad, for everything from gossip sites like Gossip, to sites that kind of targeted Black women, like Clutch magazine, which is a now defunct website that doesn't exist, but was quite popular during that time period in the early to mid 2000s. So it really was just amazing. And it's like almost everyone that I know of who started a website around the same time I started a website has a career of some sort. Either they're an author, they've continued to work in journalism, they work for major outlets now. A lot of us work for The Root, which is amazing. And seeing that digital growth and that expansion has been really, really heartening for me. Like, I'm someone who grew up reading the newspaper as a kid, hardcore news junkie. My family, both my parents were news junkies. They watched the CBS Evening News, both the 5 and the 6, and the national news at 5:30. We got every newspaper. So I read both the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, my hometown newspaper, and the St. Louis American, which was the Black newspaper in St. Louis. And I read Ebony and Jet and Essence, as well as Upscale and so many different publications. Like, you name it, Emerge. Like, I read it at some point because I was so hungry for journalism written for an African-American audience that targeted me and my viewpoint and my ideas and my thoughts and my curiosities about what it means to be Black in America today. So it's been really amazing to kind of see that spirit, because it's never really gone away. Like, there's always been this desire for us to really communicate and to tell our story. And so even though newspapers have died out in many aspects, their spirit does live on through organizations like ours, through sites like Blavity or The Griot, Shadow and Act, so many others. So, yeah.
So, it's interesting. So this next question I have for you, I knew that your perspective would be perfect for it because obviously you're the editor-in-chief of The Root. But hearing, I don't even know if this is a word, you have cinephiles and bibliophiles. You're like a newsophile, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. Right.
But with that being said, you have the perfect perspective for the next question. So what obstacles does Black media face specifically versus non-Black then? Not just from your perspective of being at The Root, but just generally from what you've seen historically.
I feel like a lot of the issues that we deal with in the Black press really boil down to access and money. Access in the sense that, like, even though The Root is a fairly large website, like, we're pretty large in number of traffic, even compared to some white websites. At one point we were reaching, oh my God, like 15, 20 million visitors a month back in 2019. And there was this, like, an education had to take place where we wanted access to things and people were like, well, who are you? And it's like, we're the site that just had 20 million visitors last month. Like, please pay attention. And so even to this day, like, I've managed to get The Root to a place where we're part of the conversation, where we're able to get access to things with some ease, but we still run up into the same walls, where, Black talent will have a white publicist. They don't know anything about the Black press. And so it doesn't even occur to them to reach out to The Root. And it doesn't occur to them to respond to us when we reach out to them. So access is still a huge issue, where you have major campaigns that just think that you just don't need to talk to the Black press at all. You have politicians that just want to bypass us. And, I'll admit, like, The Root is a tough cookie. Like, you're not going to, like, waltz in here and be like, write this big cheerleading piece about us. And, like, no, we're not going to do that. We take ourselves pretty seriously at The Root. If you want someone to say something favorably about you, you should probably put out a press release. But if you want a real story that people are going to read and get excited about, then we're the place to go. So, I say all this just basically to make the point that access is a huge, huge issue, just because a lot of times people just don't think of us when it comes time for things. But then the bigger issue, even than access, is just purely money, which has been an issue ever since the first Black newspaper. Mm-hmm. Whether it's Like one of the points that was brought up in the film was about advertisers, basically want to neuter the voice of the Black press in order to make it more palatable for who they want to sell wares to. I'm very grateful to the fact that, our publication exists post respectability politics. So we don't really believe in any of that. We pretty much want to say what we want to say and express ourselves fully and fully embrace what it means to be Black in America today. So we don't concern ourselves with as much as that. And thank God, advertisers have somewhat evolved. We still run into some similar issues, but for the most part, people who advertise with the root know what our mission is and understand that we're not going to censor ourselves and respect that and respect our audience who also strongly believes in our mission. So yes, so those are the two biggest issues I would say is access and just money.
That makes sense to me as a Black person working in any other industry. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to also add in Mr. Muhammad and Tony now to the conversation, because I want to talk more for a second about that conversation that we were just having in terms of Black media and resources, right? But I want to kind of also talk, is it important, this is a question I pose to all of you, is it important then that Black people make Black media a purposeful choice? Is it important that our community makes the choice as, people who are talent or just individual audience members of the media, that we make a purposeful choice in choosing Black media constantly to actually help with that resource issue?
Should I go first?
Yeah, Mr. Muhammad, you can go first.
Okay. I think it's extremely important that you get what you pay for, and if you're interested in issues that deal with our community, and if that provider of that information happens to be Black owned, I think it's very important. Black voices are extremely necessary at times like these. 100 years ago, we had Du Bois with the Crisis magazine, and I think the circulation of the Crisis at one time was well over 100,000 during the First World War. African Americans are going to look out for their best interests, without equivocation. So I think that, if we have the wherewithal to support independent Black voices, independent Black media, I think that it's crucial. When I was able to buy Black publications, and there were a number of them in New York, like the City Sun and the Amsterdam News. I actually bought the Amsterdam News only because I wanted to see how it was going to react to the reporting in the City Sun, which was very radical for its time, under the leadership of Andrew Cooper. It just spoke truth to power. Excuse the cliche, but essentially that's what it did. And it was a very powerful voice that really shook up New York City politics. And New York City is considered a bastion of liberalism. But I think that New York City, that's not a fair description of the way city government here has treated African Americans. And it radicalized the 1980s version of the Amsterdam News. The Amsterdam News went from being basically a social page to being more radical under the pressure put upon it by Andrew Cooper.
Gotcha. And I was going to say, Tony, if you can go next, please.
Yeah, I think the word that we have to use, Fred, is intentionality. I think you have to really be intentional about reading the Black newspaper, if you want, or reading Black news. I don't want to say newspapers. We don't even consider ourselves a newspaper any longer. We are a Black media authority. We are communicators. Yes, we have a newspaper, but that's not our major way of getting the news out to our community. So you have to be intentional about it, and we have to do a better job of certainly letting people know, how to get a hold of us. For example, Ms. Muhammad was talking about the Pittsburgh Courier. It is still in existence, and the Chicago Defender, as you know, is just totally online. But we really have to be intentional about that. There are very few Black newspapers left in the country. There are about 230 Black newspapers in the entire country. And so they're still in many major markets. Many of us are still really writing very, very hard-hitting news and commentary, but intentionality around it, and intentionality around what our young people learn in school, and what's in their hands, not just books and newspapers, but the information that's there. And so advocating for that, I think it's similar to what John Rushworm and Samuel Cornish said in 1827, too long have others spoken for us, and people are still trying to speak for us when we are very much capable of speaking for ourselves and speaking truth about ourselves in a way that is trusted. And so I think it is intentionality, whether it is the Black press, whether it's Color of Change, whether it's NAACP, it's being intentional about making sure that our voices are heard and our stories get out.
Understood. And Danielle, I don't know if you want to add something, though we were talking about this prior.
Sure. So, I feel like the best way people can support the Black press is to read it, to share it, to like it, post about it, and to, I'm not saying you have to click on an ad, but it does help. But mostly it's really just about being purposeful. Like, it is about intent. Like, if you do believe that the necessary of a Black press, you should make the point to read your local Black newspaper, to support local Black businesses, to support, Black journalists and the publications that they work for. Because the reality is, all things are still not equal. It's not like I can open up, the New York Times and the Washington Post and always see the perfect reflection back of myself and my community. Oftentimes I do not. It's much better than it used to be, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be for African Americans. We're not in a society yet where all things are equal that would eliminate the need for the Black press. That was one of the things that was fascinating about the documentary, where it talks about basically the Black press putting itself out of business, when really, to me, it's more like we just had to adapt and transform. There's still a huge need for the work that we all do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with that, especially as someone who's been on the other side of the Black press, both good and bad. But that being said, I think that this is the perfect segue into a conversation about the control of information and what information is real and of recent fake, right? So a conversation about fake news. And I'm going to pose something to all of you. And when I pose a question, we'll start with Mr. Muhammad again. So we're in this moment where fake news is a term that's been popularized over the past few years. And I want to know, what harm, if any, do you all think that term and just the concept of fake news has had on journalism, both Black and non-Black? Mr. Muhammad.
Yeah, I think that most of that in the way of the criticism of the mainstream media as being fake is mostly a political, doctrine coming from the right. But some of it's kind of a self-inflicted wound. And I think that what's attributed to that is the sort of false equivocation that the both sidism, weighing both sides and not really reporting the way things are. For instance, just in the last, I guess, year or so, the word racism has finally made itself into the content of reporting and headlines. And that was something that was basically frowned upon. Let's find a velvet glove approach to try and explain why certain politicians behave the way they do, why certain legislation is passed that is very harmful to people of color, why you find in some reporting about the policies that are being put forth during this election, where no one ever mentions the poor. You know, we don't hear. It's like you're gonna go up in a puff of smoke if you're a politician and you say, you know, my intentions are to improve the quality of life of the poor. So I think that some of the harm that has been getting caused in regards to coming up with this term of attack against mainstream media is kind of self-inflicted, but most of it is external, in my opinion.
Got it. And Tony.
Yes. Well, you know, when we say fake news, there's a lot of fake news, unsubstantiated reports, and those types of things that that's out there. In fact, news is probably an understatement. A lot of times it is commentary. It's not really news. I think also that when it comes to the Black press, and I think that's something that was Danielle was mentioning about the documentary, people depended on the Black press to give accurate news and not fake news. And, you know, news is almost like beauty. Sometimes it's in the eye of the beholder. And so the slant of the news can make it fake only because it's only one side of the news, and as opposed to being, you know, a balanced presentation of the news. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Black press, you know, someone may pick up one of our stories and say, well, that's fake news because your slant is all African American, for example. We don't have to apologize for speaking from an African American lens. That doesn't make it fake. That just means that that's the lens that we've put it, you know, that we are looking through. But there is some news that's out there, or some things that parade as news that really are not news. It's not news, and it's not true. It's just, it's there. And then there are those things that are there that people take as news. In other words, they claim it as news, but it really is not. And so that's what makes it fake as well.
Understood.
It's unsubstantiated, it's not proven. No, people are, and so there's a lot of sloppy journalism out there. I would like to think it's not in the Black press, though.
Understood. Danielle.
Yes, I mean, fake news is always going to be a problem just because of the fact that it's so easy to spread information now. It's so easy to spread any kind of information, including misinformation, which is really what fake news is. It's misinformation. It's information meant to discredit, dissuade, confuse, distort, or in some cases, just troll people. You know, some people create fake news just because it amuses them, not because they're trying to actually push things one way or the other. And it's all very insidious because it creates a distrust in the press. And people need to be able to trust their news sources. I mean, the reality is, which I figured out at a very young age, everybody can't go to the city council meeting. Everybody can't go to the school board meeting. Everybody can't go to the White House. Everybody can't go to Congress to get the answers they need to better understand the world around them. They depend on journalists to do that. That's our job. And if we're not able to do our job, you know, faithfully and accurately, like, you know, you shouldn't do it. And so the reality is most people who go into journalism have an almost near, you know, Christ-like devotion to fact-finding and the truth. Even if they are more in the advocacy or opinion realm, they do strongly believe in journalism. So it's always disheartening when you have individuals who are more interested in just getting clicks and getting attention and distorting what's going on in our world today rather than dealing with the factual issues at hand.
Understood. So one more question for all three of you, and then I'm going to ask a few more questions individually. So this last question for the three of you is, you know, we're in this moment. You mentioned information, Danielle, and I actually think that this is so important because outside of fake news, we are in this moment of disinformation. And disinformation is an extremely real thing, right? It is the strategic attempt for people to put out false information to gaslight, manipulate, and alter people's perception of the facts. So a lot of that was used during the 2016 election. We've seen much of it used in the current election already. So I'm going to ask each of you for a quick response, if possible, on the impact and the severity of disinformation from your vantage points in journalism on the Black community specifically.
I think it's a huge problem. I mean, the reality is there's so much distrust of the press right now during a time when people need the press more than ever. People are scared. People are concerned about this election. People are concerned about coronavirus. They need to understand what's going on around them. And it's not helpful when you have news organizations or individuals who print misinformation or distort facts or go with conspiracy theories. It doesn't help an already heightened and scary time to make people even more heightened and afraid.
Understood. And Tony?
Well, I was thinking, Daniel, that's very, very well said. It is, I used the word intentional earlier. It is an intentional attempt, I believe, to confuse people, take advantage of people who already are vulnerable, who are afraid and don't know who to trust. And so even when reporting from so-called trusted sources, you've got the CDC saying something one day, changing it the next day. You really don't know who to believe. You have the chief executive of the United States saying all kinds of things that are not true, proven not true, fact check not true. And so you hear sound bites of that and people are believing that. And so I think that there's an intentionality there also to deceive and mislead people, which is not really helpful, especially not just in our community. You asked about the African American community. It's all communities, but I do think it has a real negative impact on our community and the soundbite news. You don't even get the entire story, and so people are. We're reading news like we read text.
Mm-hmm.
Just give me the headline.
Yeah.
And that
and I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Tony. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I thought. Okay. Should I go ahead at that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Pardon me. I'm so sorry. What I was going to say is that also you have to consider the fact of the individual. Our citizens, our fellow citizens. We take some responsibilities ourselves, and that is if we're willfully denying facts and data as we see it, or we decide not to even seek out information. So this sort of willful ignorance is so pervasive. And I think, in a way, when you look at something like, well, I want to consume my information the way I consume fast food, just give it to me quickly. In order to understand what's going on into the world, you have to read, damn it. And people just don't, they just don't seem to want to read, get the information. And that's what perplexes me so much, because it's out there and you have to sort of harvest it. You have to throw the weeds out and the harvest that didn't make it, and get the good harvest and try to figure out where the information and the data and the facts are really resonates in their fidelity in that information. So the individual has a responsibility too, to seek out information, to get well informed, and not to deny the facts and data that's out there that will be beneficial to us all.
Gotcha. Sorry, and I'm getting notifications from the chat. So what we're gonna do for the remaining questions, because actually I'm loving this conversation. I wish that we had another hour, to be frank with you, but we don't. So as such, from now on, we're gonna do kind of laser round of questions. So my first question in the laser round is gonna actually be for Tony. So Tony, what is a piece of advice you would give a Black journalist starting out?
Well, I would say to a Black journalist starting, first of all, it depends on where they start out, Fred. Mm-hmm. It used to be that they started out in the Black press. You couldn't get a job in the white press. But no matter where they start out, I would say, be true to who you are. Don't hide all the mirrors in your house.
Gotcha.
All right. True to who you are, remember who you are, and don't just go along to get along. That you said one piece of advice. That's one piece on that side. But on the other side, hone your craft. Work on your craft.
Hone your craft. All right.
Do the work of a journalist. Yeah.
Love it.
This is a lightning round, so that's my
All right. So the next question in the lightning round actually goes to Danielle. Danielle, this is a question that was actually brought to us by the chat. Someone asked, what if there was something that basically aggregated Black media, something that brought together all Black perspectives, a digital platform, let's say, with all these different Black sources, rather. Would that be something that you think would be helpful or work from your perspective?
I mean, it just kind of depends on the apparatus. Are we talking like an app that helps pull different sources? Because a few people have tried that, where they've tried to develop apps that would pull from sites like The Root or BET or Essence and try to build out an easy way for people to access all of that content at once. The thing is like it's important to figure out a way to share revenue, because the last thing you'd want to do is like create something that basically takes like page views and visitors from those Black news sources. But yeah, I honestly feel like the more Black news, the better. So.
Gotcha.
So the aggregate sounds nice, but yeah, no, I need more outlets.
Got you. All right. So the next question in the lightning round is going to be for Mr. Muhammad. So Mr. Muhammad, you have been at the New York Times for quite some time and had an illustrious career, having, won a shared Pulitzer Award for your work, and amazing things such as that. So recently, another Pulitzer winner is at the Times, Nicole Anna Jones, and she, is the person behind the 1619 Project. What are your thoughts on the controversy and the 1619 Project in general?
Well, I think the controversy derives from, historians who have had the platform, to be frank, white historians, just to lay it down, white historians who've had the platform and the voice who did not have the wherewithal to go into places in which their scholarship would be consumed by the larger majority, the white majority, that they tailored and moved their scholarship towards not offending anyone. Because who wants their child in public school or private school to hear that African American people were brutalized for 250 years? So that's the way I see it. That the 1619 Project brought forth the hard truths about our history. And my children, I have two. I have a son and daughter, and they did not. Neither one of them had any real sense of what American history was all about. My son happened to elect to find out once he graduated from high school. You can make a choice in higher education whether you want to know the true history of America. If you don't make that choice, you can go through the rest of your life completely thinking that this is a shining city on a hill, collectively, and that the American experience is exceptional like no other. And that's very damaging. That's very damaging to a democracy. So that's my take on the 1619 Project.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I think that's extremely well said. And, so my time is sadly up, meaning that our time is up. But I think that what you said about understanding history is the note that I want to leave on, because I think that's what this is all about, right? Not just the festival or this panel, but the work that each of you has done, the work that I believe that collectively we're all trying to do is to support and lift history, because we're in history right now. The current moment that we are in is history. So that being said, I just want to thank Mr. Muhammad, Tony, and Danielle for your time and the entire audience. And now I'm going to hand it over to Isisara.
Thank you, Fred. It was cut short soon. What a potent conversation. I just want to mention one thing. Mr. Muhammad mentioned his son. Khalil Muhammad was one of the voices in our Baldwin-Buckley debate that aired on Sunday evening and is still on the festival website, the reimagining of that debate between James Baldwin and William F. Buckley. And as you peruse all of the films on our festival schedule, you will see interconnections of people and events. This was done on purpose. The connections deepen our knowledge of the past toward better understanding of current events and add to the rich tapestry of our collective history. So be sure to watch the films connected to the discussions and also hit the education tab on our website for much more rich content, which will go along with what we're talking about. For example, we have the demands that were listed on the back of the Black Panther Party paper from its first publication, the demands the paper had for better rights for people of African descent. And also, don't miss the workshops and master classes that are part of our Real Empowerment Lab for rising filmmakers and journalists, educators, and students. And so, until next time, march on.
Yeah.